She had problems. We had to send her away. My parents told that to every neighbor, every teacher, every cashier at the grocery store, every usher at First Methodist, every member of the Birchfield Rotary Club for 12 years. They said it the way you'd explain a broken appliance. Matter of fact, no emotion. Like I was a dishwasher that stopped working and they'd called the repair company, and the repair company said it was cheaper to replace. My name is Ramona Hale. I'm 34 years old. And on Memorial Day 2025, the governor of Oregon put my face on a 30-foot screen in front of 500 people in the town that was told I didn't exist. My parents were in the 12th row. They couldn't leave. They couldn't sit down when everyone else stood up. And they couldn't pretend they didn't know the name on the screen. Captain Ramona Hale, Rescue Unit 7. 500 people stood. The applause lasted 43 seconds. I counted. Because I'm the kind of woman who counts things when the moment is too big to hold any other way. If stories like mine matter to you, that subscribe button means more than you know. Let me take you back to Birchfield, Oregon. Population 6,000. The kind of town where the volunteer fire department runs the pancake breakfast and the high school football schedule is printed in the window of the hardware store. My parents, Frank and Deborah Hale, lived on Ridgeline Road in a 3-bedroom ranch with a flagpole and an American flag they raised every morning. My father sold insurance out of an office on Main Street. My mother taught Sunday school and chaired the Memorial Day Committee for 9 years. They were the Hales. Known. Respected. Visible. I was their second daughter. My sister Whitney was 3 years older. Blonde. Cheerleader. Student council. The daughter who matched. My parents framed her school photos in gold frames on the mantel. All 4 years. I was quiet. I read books instead of doing sports. I drew pictures of houses I'd never seen in places I'd never been, cottages with chimneys and gardens, the kind of houses where people stayed. I wore my father's old flannel shirts to school because they were soft and oversized, and when I pulled the sleeves down over my hands, I felt like I was inside something safe. I wasn't a problem child. I was a child whose problems were invisible anxiety that lived in my chest like a bird that wouldn't stop fluttering, a need for quiet that my family mistook for defiance, a preference for solitude that my mother called antisocial and my father called weird. I remember a Thanksgiving when I was 9. 22 people at the table. My mother's sister and her family. The neighbors. People from church. Whitney was telling a story about cheerleading tryouts, and everyone was laughing. I was sitting at the far end of the table, next to my father's chair, drawing a house on a napkin with a ballpoint pen. A cottage. Stone walls. Ivy on the chimney. My father saw me drawing. He picked up the napkin, looked at it, set it face down on the table. We're at dinner, Ramona. Not art class. 22 people heard him. Nobody said anything. Whitney laughed. My mother served pie. That was my childhood. Not abuse. Not violence. Just the slow, constant message that who I was wasn't who they needed me to be. There were others. Moments that don't bruise but leave a shape in you. My mother signed me up for soccer when I was 7. Whitney played soccer. Whitney was good. I stood on the field at practice and didn't move. The ball came toward me, and I watched it roll past like a thing that belonged to someone else. After the 3rd practice, the coach, a man named Mr. Douglas, who also worked as the school custodian, pulled my mother aside and said, "She's not unhappy. She's just somewhere else." My mother took me out of soccer and didn't sign me up for anything else. The message was clear. If you can't do what the family does, you do nothing. The 4th of July when I was 8. My father grilled burgers in the backyard. The neighbors came. The Keatings. The Burroughs family from across the street. Tom and Peggy Kessler from the hardware store. Whitney was in the driveway doing cartwheels with the Kessler twins. I was sitting under the maple tree, reading a book, Mrs. Brennan had given me the phantom toll booth. My father called across the yard, "Ramona, go play." Not come eat. Not come sit with us. Go play. Like I was a device that needed to be activated. I didn't go play. I finished the chapter. He didn't call again. For my 9th birthday, my parents threw Whitney a party 3 weeks before mine. It wasn't Whitney's birthday. It was a celebration because Whitney had been elected class president. 20 kids. A bounce house in the backyard. A sheet cake from the bakery on Main Street with "Future Leader" written in blue icing. My mother sent invitations. My birthday, 3 weeks later, was a dinner at the kitchen table. Mom, Dad, Whitney, who left early to go to a friend's house. A cupcake from the grocery store with a single candle. No invitations. No bounce house. No blue icing. I blew out the candle and wished I was somebody else's daughter. I was 9. In a family where the frame comes first and the picture comes second, the picture that doesn't fit gets stored in the attic. Or in my case, sent to Bend. When I was 8, my teacher, Mrs. Brennan, called home. She said I was withdrawn. My mother said I was shy. Mrs. Brennan tried again in 3rd grade. And 4th. Each time. She's fine. By 5th grade, the school counselor suggested an evaluation. My father came. My mother didn't. My father said, "We don't do evaluations." There's nothing wrong with my daughter. There was nothing wrong with me. I know that now. I knew it then, too, in the way children know things not in words, but in the space between what they feel and what they're told to feel. I felt fine. They said I wasn't. And when you're 8 years old and both your parents agree that something is wrong with you, you start to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you are the problem. Maybe the bird in your chest is your fault. Maybe the quiet is a defect. Maybe the houses you draw on napkins are symptoms of something that needs to be sent away. What there was a family that couldn't tolerate a child who didn't fit the frame. And rather than widen the frame, they removed the picture. The summer I turned 10, my parents told me I was going to live with Aunt Sharon for the school year. Sharon lived in Bend, 3 hours away. She was my father's sister, single, 52. A librarian at the public library with a small house, a green door, a cat named Biscuit, and bookshelves in every room, including the bathroom. My parents packed a duffel bag, 7 shirts, 3 pairs of pants, my toothbrush, a copy of Charlotte's Web from Mrs. Brennan. They drove me to Sharon's on a Saturday in August. My father carried the bag to the porch. My mother stayed in the car, didn't get out, didn't hug me, said, "Be good for Sharon." I was 10, being given away like furniture that didn't match, and the instruction was, "Be good." Sharon watched my parents drive away. She took the bag inside and said, "Your room is the one with the blue curtains. Dinner's at 6. The cat bites, but only if you deserve it." That was the beginning. What came after was the lie. My parents told Birchfield I had problems. They didn't specify. They let people imagine. In small towns, imagining the worst requires no effort. Nobody called Sharon. Nobody asked me. I was erased the way you delete a paragraph, the text before and after still flows, and unless you knew the paragraph was there, you'd never miss it. They painted my bedroom yellow. For Whitney, within a week, not a month, not after the school year to see if I'd come back. A week. My room, the one with the blue wallpaper I'd chosen at 6 because I said blue was the color of the sky when it's thinking, and my mother had looked at me like I'd said something in another language. Became a study room with a new desk and a new lamp and a bookshelf filled with Whitney's textbooks and none of my things. My drawings were gone. The houses. The cottages. The chimneys with ivy. The stack of napkin drawings I'd kept in a shoebox under my bed, all gone. My mother put them in a trash bag. Mrs. Keating told me years later that she saw the bag by the curb on garbage day and didn't understand why anyone would throw away a child's artwork. Those drawings were beautiful, she said. I almost pulled them out. I wish I had. I didn't go home for Christmas. Not the first year. Not any year. My parents sent a card. A generic one. Happy holidays from the Hales. The kind you buy in a box of 20 from the drugstore. My name wasn't in it. Whitney's was. Love, Frank, Deborah, and Whitney. I was the fourth Hale. Absent from the card. Absent from the mantle. Absent from the holiday newsletter my mother sent to 60 families every December, 2 paragraphs about Whitney's grades, 1 paragraph about my father's office renovation, and nothing about the daughter in Bend. Sharon noticed the card. She noticed the absence of my name. She didn't say anything. She put the card in a drawer and made me hot chocolate, and we watched A Christmas Story on the couch with biscuit between us. That was Christmas. Not the card. The couch. My mother called once. I was 12. She called Sharon's landline on a Sunday evening. Sharon handed me the phone. Hi, Ramona. How's school? It's fine. Are you being good for Sharon? Yes. Good. Well, we miss you, she said. We miss you, the way you'd say we'll have to get together sometime. No date. No plan. No follow-through. Just words that looked like caring if you didn't hold them up to the light. That was the last phone call. She didn't call again. Not in 10 years. For 12 years, my parents had 2 daughters in public and 1 in private. Whitney graduated. Whitney married Kyle. Whitney moved to Lake Oswego with a Honda Pilot and a Labradoodle. Whitney was the family. I was the footnote they'd agreed to forget. Sharon didn't try to replace my parents. She didn't give speeches about family or love or everything happens for a reason. She made dinner every single night. Chicken and rice on Mondays. Pasta on Tuesdays. Soup on Wednesdays. Fish sticks on Fridays because she said even librarians need a shortcut. We ate at a small table in the kitchen. 2 chairs. 2 plates. 2 glasses of water. She asked about my day. Every night. Not how was school, the generic kind. Specific questions. What did you read? Did Mr. Price give you the front row chair? Did Biscuit sit on your homework again? She drove me to school. She helped with homework at the kitchen table after dinner. She came to every band concert. I played clarinet. Badly, at first. So badly that Sharon said, after my first concert in 6th grade, the clarinet is the most honest instrument. You can hear everything, including the mistakes. That's why it's brave. That was the most Sharon thing anyone has ever said. By 10th grade, I was in the front row. Price, the band director, put me there because I'd practiced every night in Sharon's living room while she read in the armchair and Biscuit slept on the radiator. She never once asked me to play quieter. She just turned pages and let me practice. That's love without an instruction manual. She sat in the 2nd row of every event. Not the front. She said the front was for people who need to be seen, and she was there to see me, not be seen. She clapped like she meant it. She always meant it. She took me to the Bend Public Library every Saturday morning. Not because I asked, because she knew I needed a place where quiet wasn't a flaw. We'd walk in and she'd go to the reference desk and I'd go to the fiction section and we'd spend 2 hours in the same building without speaking, connected by the shared belief that a room full of books is never really empty. She taught me to cook the summer I was 13. Not complicated things. Scrambled eggs, grilled cheese, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, because she said, The jar is not a failure, it's a starting point. She showed me how to hold a knife. Curl the fingers, Ramona. Always curl the fingers. And how to tell when the pan is hot enough by holding your hand 6 inches above it. She was patient the way librarians are patient, accustomed to people who need time to find what they're looking for. She never said, "Your parents don't love you." She never said, "You're better off here." She never lied in either direction. But she said one thing. Once, when I was 14 and yelling in the kitchen about why I couldn't go home, that changed the shape of everything. "Ramona, home is where people show up for you." I showed up. And this is home. I stopped yelling, started crying. She stood there, solid as the bookshelves, and waited. She didn't touch me. She didn't hug me. She waited until I was ready. Because Sharon understood that some kids don't want to be held. Some kids want to be witnessed. And witnessing requires standing still. The summer I was 15, I failed my driving test. Parallel parking. I hit the cone, and the examiner said, "Not today." I walked out of the DMV with my face burning and sat on the curb and cried. Not about the test. About everything. About being the girl who got sent away. About being the problem that got mailed to Bend in a duffel bag. About being broken. Sharon pulled up in her Subaru. She looked at me on the curb. She didn't ask if I passed. She could see. She sat down next to me, on the curb, in her khaki pants and her library cardigan, right on the concrete. "You know what the return rate is at the Bend Public Library?" she said. I didn't answer. 94%. That means 6% of the books never come back. People lose them, forget them, move away. Some of those books are the best ones in the collection. The fact that someone didn't return them doesn't mean the book was broken. It means the borrower wasn't ready for it. She looked at me. "You're not a broken book, Ramona. You were checked out by people who weren't ready for what was inside." I sat on that curb for another 2 minutes. Then I got in the car. She drove me to the parking lot behind the library, and I practiced parallel parking for an hour. Passed the next week. But the parking wasn't the point. The point was, for the first time in 5 years, I believed her. Not because she said I wasn't broken. She'd been saying that in small ways since I was 10. Because she sat on a curb in her good pants to say it. And Sharon didn't sit on curbs. She sat in chairs, behind desks, in the second row of auditoriums. Curbs were beneath her station, but I wasn't. High school in Bend was different from what it would have been in Birchfield. In Birchfield, I would have been Frank and Deborah's daughter, Whitney's sister, the quiet one who drew houses. In Bend, I was just Ramona. Nobody knew my parents. Nobody knew the story. Nobody looked at me and saw a problem that had been sent away. They just saw a girl with a clarinet case and a library card and a tendency to sit in the back of every room. I made 2 friends. Actual friends. Not the kind you're assigned in group projects. The kind who find you in the lunch line and don't ask why you're eating alone. They just sit down. Amber and Jen. Amber played drums. Jen ran cross-country. We were the 3 quietest people in the building, which is why we found each other. Quiet people orbit the same rooms. Amber's parents were divorced. Jen's dad had died when she was 7. We never talked about our families. Not because it was a rule. Because we understood without saying it that some stories are better left folded in a drawer. We talked about music, about books, about whether it was scientifically possible to be killed by a falling piano in real life. We talked about things that didn't hurt. I graduated in the top 10 of my class. Sharon sat in the second row. She brought a disposable camera because she said digital photos disappear into phones and nobody prints them. She took 11 pictures. I have them all, framed, in my apartment in Salem. 11 photos of a girl in a cap and gown who used to draw houses on napkins and now draws structural support diagrams for earthquake damage assessments. Sharon gave me a card at graduation. Inside, $100 and a note. You were never what they said you were. You were always what I saw. Go be brave. I kept the note. It's taped to the inside of my locker at the firehouse. After high school, I went to Oregon State. Fire science. People asked why. I had a 3. 7 gigapascals and a clarinet and a librarian aunt. Nobody expected me to run into burning buildings. But Sharon had taught me something without ever saying it directly. Showing up is a physical act. It's not a feeling. It's not a promise. It's a body in a room when the room is hard to be in. Sharon showed up every morning at a kitchen table for a kid who wasn't hers. She showed up to band concerts where I squeaked through half the notes. She showed up to the DMV curb in her good pants. She showed up every single time, in person, with her whole self. I wanted to do that. But I wanted to do it in the most literal way possible, to show up at the place where the floor is on fire and the ceiling is coming down and the person inside has already decided nobody's coming. I wanted to be the person who comes anyway. I wanted to be the opposite of leaving. I joined the Oregon State Fire Marshal's office. Volunteer first, then paid reserve, then full-time. The pay was $36,000 a year starting. I lived in a studio apartment in Salem with a mattress on the floor and a poster of the periodic table on the wall because Sharon had given it to me as a graduation present and said, "Everything in the universe is on this chart, including you." I made Rescue Unit 7 after 18 months of specialized training. Structural collapses, wildland interface fires, mass casualty incidents. The kind of calls where the building is still moving when you arrive, and the question isn't, is it safe to go in, but how long do we have before it comes down? I trained in 100-degree heat and sub-zero cold. I crawled through collapse simulations with a 60-pound pack on my back. I learned to read cracks in concrete the way Sharon taught me to read books, line by line, looking for what's between the words. The training academy was 12 weeks at the state facility outside Corvallis. 32 recruits. 6 women. I was the smallest person in the class by 23 pounds. The PT instructor, a man named Sergeant Volk, who had a shaved head and the demeanor of a cinder block, looked at me on the first day and said, "What do you weigh?" I said, 132. He said, "That's either going to be a problem or an asset. We'll find out." Week 3, a recruit named Davis 24, former Army, 210 pounds of confidence quit. He walked off the obstacle course mid-drill, took his helmet off, set it on the ground, and said, "This isn't what I signed up for." Volk watched him leave. Didn't say a word. Didn't try to stop him. That night in the barracks, Colleen asked me if I'd ever thought about quitting. I said no. She asked why not. Because I was sent away once. By people who decided I wasn't worth the effort. I'm not going to send myself away from anything. Not ever. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Okay. Tomorrow, we do the tower climb. I'll carry the hose if you carry the nozzle." That was the beginning of the partnership. We found out. Week 4. Confined space entry drill. A collapsed simulation structure with a 20-foot crawl through a gap 14 inches high. 3 recruits couldn't fit. 2 more panicked halfway through and had to back out. I went in and came out the other side in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Fastest in the class. Volk looked at the stopwatch. Then at me. "Asset," he said. 1 word. Crossed my name off whatever list he'd had me on. My closest friend in the academy was a woman named Colleen Parker, a former high school volleyball player from Eugene who'd switched careers after watching the Almeda fire burn through her parents' neighborhood in 2020. She was 6 feet tall, built like a middle blocker. She couldn't fit through the confined spaces. I couldn't carry a 200-pound training dummy up 4 flights of stairs. We partnered on every drill. She carried what I couldn't lift. I entered what she couldn't fit through. That's how rescue units work. You're not a team because everyone does the same thing. You're a team because everyone does the thing nobody else can. Colleen is still on Unit 7. She was with me in Woodburn. She was the one feeding the hydraulic line through the gap while I operated the jack from inside. I couldn't have pulled Gerald out without her holding the gap stable from the other side. 15 hours side by side in a collapsed building. She didn't leave. That's the kind of person she is. The kind who stays. Unit 7 became my family. Not a metaphor, the actual functional replacement. Doug Hatcher, my captain, had been on the unit for 22 years and had a voice that sounded like gravel in a tumbler. He called everyone by last name except me. He called me Hale, not Ramona. Hale, like I'd earned the surname my parents had tried to erase from the town records. Marcus Webb ran the engine 6-3, 240, a former high school tight end who could carry a charged hose, line up 4 flights without stopping. He brought donuts every Saturday shift and always left the maple one for me, because I'd mentioned once that Sharon used to buy me maple bars from the bakery in Bend. Once, he remembered. My first real deployment was 3 months after certification. A house fire on the south side of Salem. 2-story. The second floor had partially collapsed into the first. A family of 4 was inside. The parents made it out through a window. The 2 kids, both under 10, were on the second floor. Hatcher looked at the structure and then looked at me. You're the only one who fits through the stairwell. The collapse narrowed it to about 16 inches. Can you do it? I pulled my mask down. The air tasted like smoke and insulation and the chemical sweetness of burning carpet. The turnout gear weighed 47 pounds. My heart was hitting my ribs so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The stairwell was black, not dark black. The kind of dark where your headlamp shows you 3 feet and then nothing. I went in. 16 inches. The wall was hot against my shoulder. I could hear wood splintering somewhere above me, the sound of a house, giving up on being a house. I found both kids in a bedroom closet. The older one, a boy, maybe 8, was holding his sister with both arms. He was shaking. Tears had made tracks through the soot on his face. I said, I'm here. We're going out. He said, promise? I said, promise. I carried the girl. Colleen met me at the stairwell gap and took the boy from the other side. 4 minutes in the structure. The longest 4 minutes of my life up to that point. When I came out, Marcus was standing at the perimeter with a blanket and a bottle of water and the expression of a man who'd just watched someone half his size do something he physically could not. Afterward, Hatcher put his hand on my helmet. Not my shoulder, my helmet. The way you touch the thing that kept someone alive. You're small, Hale. That's going to save someone's life. He was right. I became the entry specialist. The one they sent in first. The one who goes where the ceiling is 14 inches from the floor. 14 deployments in 2 years. Each time, somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my father's voice. Ramona, go play. And I went in anyway. Going in was the opposite of going away. Sharon came to my promotion ceremony when I made captain. She drove from Bend. 3 hours. She sat in the folding chairs in the training yard with the other families, and she clapped when they pinned the bars on my collar. Afterward, she said, you're a captain. The girl with the duffel bag is a captain. She said it the way she said everything, like a fact. Like a thing she'd always known. Would you have gone back? If the town that erased you put your name on a stage, would you have walked onto it? Or would you have stayed where you were and let the distance speak? Drop your honest answer in the comments. The 12th of January, 2025, 4:47 a.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The text was from dispatch. Unit 7 full deployment. Woodburn. Structure collapse. Multiple trapped. I was out of bed in 4 seconds. Boots on in 12. I drove to the staging area in the dark with my turnout gear in the back seat and the periodic table posters still glowing faintly in the rearview mirror from the headlights. The Cascades earthquake. 5.9 magnitude. Epicenter 12 miles southeast of Salem. A commercial warehouse in Woodburn Richards Distribution, a food packaging facility collapsed at 4:31 a.m. 11 workers were inside. The night shift. The building was a pre-engineered metal structure from 1987 with unreinforced tilt-up concrete walls. When the shaking started, the walls went first. Then the roof trusses. Then the mezzanine floor. 11 people were under it. My unit arrived at 6:14 a.m. The dust was still settling. The building looked like a crumpled aluminum can with rebar sticking out at angles that shouldn't exist. The parking lot was full of emergency vehicles. Red and blue lights, the sound of generators and radio chatter, and underneath all of it, the silence of a building that used to be standing. Doug Hatcher, my captain, looked at the structure and then looked at me. Entry point is on the north side. 14-inch gap between the mezzanine slab and the east wall. You're going in first. 19 hours. 4 entries. The first 3 were systematic: locate, assess, extract. I crawled through spaces that made my ribs feel too wide. I breathed through a mask that fogged with every exhale. I communicated by radio in short sentences because long sentences use too much air. I pulled a woman named Teresa out at 8:22 a.m. She was conscious. She was crying. She said, "I thought nobody was coming." I said, "I'm here." She weighed 115 pounds. I carried her on my back through 40 feet of collapsed steel. The second was a man named Paul who'd been on the mezzanine when it fell. He was unconscious. A beam had fallen across his legs but missed his spine by 6 inches. 6 inches is the width of a paperback book. That paperback was the difference between walking out of the hospital and not walking at all. I stabilized his legs, called in the extraction team, and crawled back in. The third was Gerald, 240 pounds, pinned under a steel beam at the center of the collapse. I weighed 132. The gap to reach him was 14 inches. My shoulders are 13. Colleen fed the hydraulic line through from the other side, while I crawled flat on my stomach across 40 feet of fractured concrete. The air down there smelled like dust and diesel and something metallic, the smell of steel under stress. My elbows bled through my sleeves. My headlamp flickered twice, and I talked to it the way you talk to a car that's stalling. Not now. Not yet. Gerald was conscious. Barely. His voice came out of the dark like a radio with a dying battery. "Is someone there?" I said, "I'm here." "I'm not leaving," he said. "I can't feel my legs." I said, "I know. That's why I brought the jack." I positioned the hydraulic jack against the beam, a 12-inch I-beam that weighed more than Gerald and me combined. Pumped it 6 inches. Heard the concrete shift above us. Pumped it 2 more. Cut the rebar pinning his left leg with the circular saw sparks in a 14-inch space, the noise so loud it erased everything else. Then I hooked his harness to the dragline and pulled. 40 feet, inch by inch. Colleen pulling from the other end. 15 hours into a 19-hour operation, my arms stopped shaking somewhere around the 30-foot mark. Not because I got stronger, because my body stopped asking permission and just did it. Gerald survived. 3 surgeries. 8 weeks in the hospital. 4 months of physical therapy. His wife Helen came to the hospital the morning after the rescue. She found me in the parking lot, sitting on the bumper of the unit truck, drinking a Gatorade with concrete dust still in my hair. She hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. She was crying. She said, "You're so small." I said, "Small people fit in small gaps." She laughed through the crying. Then she stepped back and looked at me, really looked at me. The way you look at a person when you realize they exist in a way you hadn't considered before, and said, "How old are you?" 33. You're younger than my daughter. I know. My daughter can't change a tire. I can't either, actually. I just know how to move a steel beam. She laughed again. That was the first time in 19 hours I'd laughed. Gerald was alive. Teresa was alive. Paul was alive. 11 people went into that building and 11 people came out. Every single one. Because a unit of 12 people worked for 19 hours and didn't stop. The news coverage ran for 3 days. Local. Then regional. Then a segment on Portland's KGW that showed the helmet cam footage from my third entry, the gap, the darkness, Gerald's voice calling from underneath the slab. The footage was grainy and shaky, and the audio was mostly me breathing. But 20 seconds in, you can hear me say, clear as glass, "I'm here. I'm not leaving." Doug Hatcher told me later that line was the most watched clip from the earthquake coverage in the state. 700,000 views. I'm here. I'm not leaving. 5 words. The opposite of everything my parents ever said to me. The governor's office called in March. Courage Award. Memorial Day ceremony. I said yes. Then I found out where. Birchfield, Oregon. My parents' town. My mother's ceremony. Their stage. And now my name was going to be on it. I called Sharon. She was quiet for 7 seconds. I could hear the ocean through her kitchen window. Then she said, "Well, they did always love a good ceremony." I called Sharon. She said, "What would you do?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "I'm a librarian, Ramona. I believe in reading things out loud." That was all she needed to say. I wrote the speech at my kitchen table. Small table. 2 chairs. Just like Sharon's. The first draft was angry. I sounded like the 14-year-old yelling in her kitchen. Threw it away. The second was polished challenges, resilience, the journey of service. Sounded like a LinkedIn post. Threw that one away too. The third was honest. It used the word duffel bag. It used 7 shirts. It used, they painted my room yellow for my sister. It didn't perform. It told, I kept the third. Memorial Day. Town Square. Birchfield, Oregon. 500 people. Folding chairs on the grass. A 30-foot LED screen rented from the county. The high school marching band. The VFW color guard. American flags on every post. Red, white, and blue bunting on the stage. The kind of ceremony that small towns do better than cities because everyone in the crowd knows everyone on the stage, and the distance between them is the width of a main street. My parents were in row 12, center section. My mother in a navy dress she'd probably bought for the occasion. My father in a gray suit with the American flag pin he wore every Memorial Day. They'd helped set up that morning. My mother arranged the flower displays on the stage. My father tested the microphone and adjusted the speaker angles. They'd been doing this for 9 years. It was their ceremony, their production, their stage. They didn't know whose name was on the award. The governor's office had kept it confidential. I arrived at 2:15, parked behind the community center, walked through the back entrance. The stage manager, a woman named Tina, who worked for the governor's events team, showed me to a holding area behind the curtain. I could hear the band warming up. I could hear 500 chairs being occupied. I could hear my mother's voice from the stage. She was giving last-minute instructions about the flower arrangements. I stood behind the curtain, 15 feet from the podium. Listening to my mother direct a ceremony that was about to become the longest 7 minutes of her life, Sharon drove from Bend. 3 hours. She parked on a side street and walked to the square alone. She sat in the back row. Not because the front was full, because she's the kind of woman who sits where the work has already been done and doesn't need to be seen doing it. Do you think she should have mentioned her parents from the stage? If you already know what happened, drop it in the comments. The governor took the podium. The Governor's Courage Award is given to one Oregonian each year who demonstrates extraordinary bravery. This year's recipient pulled 3 people from a collapsed warehouse, entering an unstable structure 4 times in 19 hours. The screen lit up. My photo. Helmet under my arm. Unit 7 patch. Captain Ramona Hale. 500 people stood up. 43 seconds of applause. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father's face went white. Mrs. Keating from Ridgeline Road leaned to the woman beside her. Hale. Same last name? Then she looked at my parents. Then at the screen. Her face changed. Tom Kessler from the hardware store turned to his wife Peggy. That's Frank's daughter. The one they sent away. Meredith Home from Sunday school closed her eyes and pressed her lips together. I walked to the podium. 500 people. 30-foot screen. My name in letters 3 feet tall. I gave my speech. 7 minutes. I started with Unit 7. The training. The deployments. The earthquake. Gerald, who weighed 240 and is alive because the gap was 14 inches and I weighed 132. Small people fit in small gaps, I said. The crowd laughed. 500 people laughing together sounds like a wave. It sounds like the beginning of something. I talked about service, about what it means to go into a building that's falling, about the people who run toward the thing everyone else is running from. I talked about Doug Hatcher, my captain, who told me on my first day that fear is not the opposite of bravery, hesitation is. You can be afraid, he said. Just don't be late. The crowd clapped. The governor nodded from the front row. Then I looked at the 12th row. I found my parents, my mother's navy dress, my father's flag pin. They were smiling. They thought the speech was over. They thought the clapping was the end. It wasn't. Then I said this. 12 years ago, 2 people in this town told everyone I had problems. They sent me away with a duffel bag and 7 shirts when I was 10. They painted my room yellow for my sister. They told this town I was broken. 500 people. Not a sound. Those 2 people are here today. 12th row. They helped set up the stage this morning. My mother's hand dropped. My father gripped the armrest. I am not broken. I was never broken. I was a quiet kid who liked books and didn't fit the frame. And the people who should have widened the frame chose to remove the picture instead. Mrs. Keating was crying. Silently. Her hand pressed against her chest like she was holding something in. Tom Kessler stared at my parents from 3 rows back, his arms crossed, his jaw set. The look of a man who'd sold Frank Hale light bulbs and lumber for 30 years and was now doing the math on what that man had built with them. Peggy Kessler, Tom's wife, reached for his hand. He didn't take it. He was too focused on the 12th row. Pastor Collins took off his glasses and cleaned them. Slowly. The way men do when they need something to do with their hands because what they're feeling doesn't fit in their body. The Burroughs family, Janet and Phil, who lived across from Ridgeline Road and had brought over a casserole when Whitney was born, but not when I was sat, very still. Janet's mouth was a thin line. Phil was staring at his shoes. A veteran in the front row, a man in his 70s wearing a VFW cap and a chest full of pins, turned in his chair and looked at the 12th row, not with anger. With the specific weight of a man who knows what it means to be sent somewhere nobody asked you to go. The high school band director, a young woman named Miss Callahan, who'd taken over from Mr. Price 10 years ago, was standing at the side of the stage with her baton in her hand. She was holding it so tight, the knuckles were white. She told Tina later that she'd wanted to start playing something, anything to fill the silence. But the silence was the point. My mother was sitting rigid. Her hands were in her lap. The monogrammed handkerchief she'd brought, the one she used for ceremonies, embroidered with DH for Deborah Hale, was twisted between her fingers. She wasn't dabbing her eyes. She was ringing it, the way you ring something when you can't ring anything else. The woman who raised me is sitting in the back row. Her name is Sharon Pratt. She's a librarian in Bend. She drove 3 hours to be here because that's what she does. She shows up. 500 people turned. They found Sharon. Blue cardigan. Back row. They stood up again. A second standing ovation. For a librarian who raised a girl nobody wanted. My parents sat. 500 people were standing, applauding, for a librarian and the girl she raised. My mother and father sat in their folding chairs with their hands in their laps and their faces pointed forward, and every person in the rows around them could see that the couple who had organized this ceremony for 9 years, who had tested the microphone and arranged the flowers and posted the flags, were the only people in 500 who didn't stand when the room stood twice. The mayor, a man named Ted Calloway, who'd played golf with my father for 15 years, looked at them from the stage. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked away, not with anger, with the specific expression of a man who is rewriting every golf game and every dinner party and every conversation he'd ever had with Frank Hale through a new lens. Margie, who ran the diner on Main Street where my father ate breakfast every Tuesday, told someone later that she'd served him eggs and coffee for 12 years, while his daughter was in Bend growing up to be the kind of person who crawls into collapsed buildings to save strangers. I gave that man extra bacon, she said. Extra bacon. After the ceremony, Mrs. Keating found me. Still crying. I believed them. Every time. Tom Kessler shook my hand. Your aunt raised a hell of a captain. She raised a reader first. The captain came later. Janet Burrows from the flower shop told me she'd already taken down the arrangements she'd sold my mother for the stage. After the ceremony, the governor shook my hand. She said, "That was the bravest speech I've heard in 12 years in this office." I said, "I've been practicing for 12 years too." My parents left during the reception. They didn't stop at the refreshment table. They didn't shake hands. They walked through the crowd without speaking to anyone, and the crowd parted for them, not out of respect, but out of the specific awkwardness that comes from standing next to someone whose story just ended differently than you'd been told. My father's hand was on my mother's back, not guiding, steadying, the way you steady someone whose legs have stopped being reliable. Their car was parked in the lot behind the stage, the same lot where my mother had unloaded the flower arrangements that morning. She'd driven in with roses for a ceremony she organized. She drove out past 500 people who knew she'd sent her daughter away with a duffel bag. Tom Kessler watched them from the refreshment line. He turned to Peggy and said, 30 years I've sold him light bulbs. I never knew what he was building with them. Peggy didn't answer. She was watching Sharon, who was still sitting in the back row. Blue cardigan. Reading glasses. Not celebrating. Just sitting. The way she always sat. Present without performing. Avery, my fire science professor at Oregon State, came to the ceremony. She'd driven from Corvallis. She was sitting in the 7th row. She told me afterward, I've been teaching for 26 years. I've had students who were smart. I've had students who were brave. You're the first one who was both, because she had to be. She meant it as a compliment. But what she was really saying was, some people become brave because the world is dangerous. And some people become brave because their own family was the first building that collapsed. and they've been crawling through the rubble ever since. Gerald and his wife Helen were in the audience. Fourth row. They'd driven from Woodburn. Gerald was walking with a cane, 6 months of physical therapy since the collapse. When the crowd stood the second time, for Sharon, Gerald stood too. It took him 11 seconds to get up. Helen helped him. He held the cane in one hand and put the other over his heart. He stood there for the full 43 seconds. A retired school teacher named Dorothy Porter drove 90 minutes from Redmond because she'd read about the award. She found me after, tissue in each hand. I was the quiet kid too. Nobody sent me away, but they sent me somewhere inside myself. I hugged her. She let me. Within 3 months, Birchfield rearranged itself. My parents stepped down from the Memorial Day committee. 3 families on Ridgeline stopped waving. Not all at once, one by one. The way lights turn off in a building floor by floor until the only one still lit is the lobby, and eventually that goes dark too. Pastor Collins called my father. "We should talk, Frank. We're handling it privately." "You handled it privately for 12 years. That's the problem. Margie at the diner stopped giving my father extra bacon. She told Janet Burrows, "I served that man eggs for 12 years while his daughter was crawling into burning buildings." I gave him extra bacon. Extra bacon. Not anymore. The insurance office on Main Street lost 3 clients in 2 months. People didn't cancel because of the ceremony. They canceled because they couldn't sit across from a man who'd said she had problems for 12 years and then sit in a folding chair while his daughter got a standing ovation from the governor. The math didn't work. The narrative didn't hold. Whitney called in August. First time in 4 years. "I didn't know, Ramona. You knew my room was painted yellow." Silence. The kind that lasts longer than it should, because the person on the other end is remembering every afternoon they spent in a yellow room that used to be blue and never once asked where the blue went. "I'm sorry. I know. Can we try?" "We can try. But the yellow room is where we start, not where we skip." My parents haven't called. Not once. Not after the ceremony. Not after Whitney called me. Not after the insurance office lost 3 clients. Not after Pastor Collins told them they should talk. My father texted once. September. 4 months after Memorial Day. "We saw the ceremony." 3 words. The same number of words my mother used the day she dropped me off at Sharon's. "Be good for Sharon." 3 words then. 3 words now. 24 years apart. The same emotional budget. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Out of math. 3 words after 24 years is an average of 1 word every 8 years. That's not a conversation. That's a census. My mother hasn't texted. Hasn't written. Hasn't called. I think she's waiting for me to make the first move, the way she waited for me to be good for Sharon. She gives instructions and waits. She's very good at waiting. She waited 12 years for the town to forget I existed. She'll wait 12 more for me to pretend the ceremony didn't happen. I set 2 conditions for any contact with my parents. First, they acknowledge what they did. Not we made the best decision we could at the time. Not we thought it was right. They say, "We sent you away because you didn't fit our image. We told the town you had problems. We painted your room." Second, they say it to Sharon. In person. In her living room, where the bookshelves are. They haven't met either condition. Sharon retired last fall. She moved to a cottage near the coast in Newport. Sea, air, a garden. A new cat named Hemingway because she said all cats are writers. They just don't publish. She calls every Sunday at 7. She asks what I'm reading. She asks about the unit. She asks if Hemingway has eaten the houseplants yet. She never asks about my parents. She doesn't need to. She knows the math better than anyone. She showed up every day for 12 years. Made dinner. Drove to school. Sat in the second row. Clapped like she meant it. They showed up once in folding chairs. In the 12th row of a ceremony they'd organized, and when 500 people stood up, they were the only two who didn't. Sharon knows the math. 12 years of dinners versus 12 rows of distance. The numbers tell the whole story. I visited Sharon last month. We sat on her porch and watched the ocean. Hemingway sat between us and purred like a small engine. I told her about a deployment to house fire in Salem where I pulled an elderly woman from a second-floor bedroom. The woman hugged me afterward and said, "You're an angel." I told Sharon that. She laughed. "You're not an angel. You're a librarian's niece who practiced clarinet for 8 years and read 3,000 books. Angels are born. You were built." That's the most Sharon thing she's ever said. And she's said a lot of Sharon things. Amber and Jen came to visit last month. We sat on my balcony in Salem and drank beer, and Jen said, "So, you're famous now." I said, "I'm not famous. I'm identifiable. There's a difference." Amber said, "The difference is famous people have agents, and identifiable people have nightmares about public speaking." We laughed. The 3 quietest people from Bend High, sitting on a balcony 20 years later, laughing about a 30-foot screen. I still have the duffel bag. It's in the closet in my apartment. Black nylon, fraying at one strap. The zipper still works. I checked last week. 7 shirts went in. A rescue captain came out. My name is Ramona Hale. I'm 34 years old. I was sent away at 10 with a duffel bag, erased from a town for 12 years. And on Memorial Day, in front of 500 people and a 30-foot screen and the governor and the 2 people who said I was broken, I proved the only thing broken was the story they told. 500 people stood. The only ones who didn't were in row 12. Some people build stages. Some get sent away from them. And some walk back 24 years later with their name 3 feet tall and let the screen do the talking. If someone told you that you were the problem and the problem was never you, sit with that. The building fell. You went in. That's all that matters. I'll be right here on the porch when you're ready for the next one.